So new Borderlands 4 information has seemingly been ramping up, but we are finally going to be getting our first official look at the Endgame very soon. And this is going to be at PAX West 2025. This is going to be on Friday, August 29th from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. PST. So they're going to have an hour on stage, and we have gotten it confirmed from the official Borderlands Twitter that this is where they will finally be talking about the Endgame. And while we haven't gotten a ton of information on the Endgame so far, there is a few things we've already gotten. And I would suspect that this is going to be the last big info dump we're going to be getting before the actual launch of Borderlands 4, because there's nothing really else that they would be showing us. Maybe they'll release a couple more trailers. We still have all of the different trailers and cinematic story trailer for Harlow, but we've already gotten a look at her gameplay and I think all of her skill trees now. So after her videos are released and after this PAX West showcase, we pretty much won't have anything else besides some launch trailers and things like that. Then we'll be able to actually play the game. Now, I do have a previous video where I go much more into detail of all of the Endgame information we've gotten so far, but I'll try to re-go over some of that information in this video in a much more simplified form. Now, the two biggest pieces of actual information we've gotten on the Endgame is some of the progression systems. First off, being what are called specialization points, which are things you only get after you hit max level. So these are kind of similar to like badass ranks from previous games. But we have also gotten these talked about a little bit from developers, where instead of these just being a ton of really small stat increases, these seem to be much more impactful new effects that you actually have choices when getting these new points. So instead of just small stat increases, you're getting actual specialization choices where you actually have to make choices between different options that are probably going to give much more substantial effects that may actually impact your gameplay instead of just being like very small power increases that build up over time, which I think is much more interesting than just small stat increases. The other big piece of kind of endgame progression are called firmware. Now, this isn't specifically for the endgame because you can find these on lower level pieces of gear, but every time the developers have talked about the system, it has been talked about that these are kind of more focused on the endgame, and these are essentially gear sets in Borderlands 4. So all of your non-weapon gear pieces can roll these. So that means 5 different slots can roll these, and each gear set can have up to 3 pieces with them equipped to get stronger and stronger versions of that gear set. But you could still just use like 1 out of 3 for 5 different gear sets, or you could use 3 out of 3 in one gear set and 2 out of 3 in another gear set. So that's essentially how these firmware gear sets are going to be working. There are additional rolls on top of your already pre-existing gear sets for everything besides your weapons. And we do also already have it confirmed that there is going to be an NPC that allows you to take firmware off of one piece of gear and put it on another piece of gear. So while these are another layer on all of your gear pieces that aren't weapons, you will also just be able to switch them around to your actual better rolled gear pieces. And I'm presuming this is just to not add even more RNG. So if you get, say, like a perfectly rolled class mod, you don't want to be just kind of screwed by not getting a roll of a firmware piece on that. So you'll be able to freely just get pieces with firmware on them and just put that firmware on your actual gear pieces. And those two pieces of information are really the only pieces of specific info we've gotten on the endgame. We have had developers talk many times about the entirety of Borderlands 4 being designed with the endgame in mind. So that includes skill trees, that includes difficulty, that includes weapons, customization, all your gear slots. Everything has been designed with the endgame of Borderlands 4 in mind. We do know that the endgame on launch, specifically on launch, is going to be significantly larger than any previous Borderlands game. So it seems like we're actually going to have quite a substantial endgame just on the launch of the game. And it seems like they're planning on adding a ton more content as post-launch support. So we know the general way that they've been thinking about the endgame, but for other specifics, we don't really have anything. We know that the new kind of affix system for monsters are going to play into that. So instead of having like mayhem modifiers from Borderlands 3, elites and badass classes and mini bosses are now going to have more of an affix system like you find in a lot of ARPGs like Diablo, where they will have some like affix tag on them that gives them some additional effect, and you'll have to play around that. And I think that's actually much better than we've gotten in previous Borderlands games. We know there's going to be different difficulties in the campaign, and presumably there's going to be some other difficulty settings within the end game as well, but we don't have any specifics on any of that either. And while the reveals for all the different Vault Hunters have been incredibly excited, and I think they've done a really good job about giving us those cinematics and giving us all the other information on the different Vault Hunters so far, I think this is what I am most excited for so far, getting to see what the end game is actually going to be on launch. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.